we're going to go ahead and just jump right into this. I wanted to start by talking about the history of preservation and kind of where preservation began and when it began in the United States. It all began with a woman by the name of Anne Pamela Cunningham. And in the 1850s, Anne's mother, while taking a steamboat up the Potomac River, saw the deteriorated condition of Mount Vernon and wrote about it to her daughter, Anne. Anne decided to take on the project of raising money to buy the property for preservation. At that point, neither the Commonwealth of Virginia nor the federal government's legislatures would approve such purposes as they dealt with an impending war. Cunningham was in her 30s when she initiated her campaign, first writing an open letter to a local newspaper addressed to, quote, the ladies of the South, unquote, to raise money for the first president's home. She founded the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, seeking representative women leaders from each of the 30 states in the Union. Cunningham served as its first regent. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association bought Mount Vernon, its outbuildings, and 200 acres for $200,000. They were successful in raising all funds needed to complete the purchase from John A. Washington in 1859. This association is the oldest private preservation organization in the United States. The group still owns and manages Washington's estate and is open to visitors, 365 days a year. Others noticed the work of Anne Pamela Cunningham and the Mount Vernon Ladies Association and decided to form their own preservation-focused organization. This chart highlights some early preservation organizations and the years they were funded. These efforts then led to public preservation efforts that led to legislative action. So in 1906, it begins with the Antiquities Act, and then kind of comes to a head with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966. But prior to the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act, we have, there's a couple of things that are going on in the 1950s that really kind of set the stage for raising preservation awareness throughout the United States. And one of those things is the Federal Highways Act that was passed in 1956. With the construction of these large interstates and federal highways, many areas throughout the United States that were considered blighted were demolished. A lot of communities in lower income areas were bisected, and many people were displaced as a result. A lot of architectural fabric that could have been saved and rehabilitated was just wiped out. And people began to notice the changes that were happening and the effects that it was having on these communities, and they were like, no, this has got to stop. And so that's what really led to the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act, like I said, in 1966. Section 106 of that act requires federal agencies to consider the effects their undertakings will have on properties listed in or eligible for listing in the National Register. So that's very important to remember. It doesn't say anything about properties that are locally designated or recognized in another way. They have to be listed in or eligible for listing. The act also required each state and U.S. territory to create its own state historic preservation office. And that office is to provide technical guidance to local governments and constituents within the state where they operate. It also created the National Register for Historic Places, which we're going to be talking a little bit more about later. When this act was passed, states likewise created legal frameworks at the state level that kind of mirrored the National Historic Preservation Act.